Greetings, everyone. Apologies for the delay on getting the start to the webinar going here. Thank you for joining our webinar on Giving to China in 2025. My name is Birger Stamperdahl. I'm the president and CEO of Give to Asia, and we're going to spend the next 30 minutes with you today sharing information from our perspective on how to support local charitable projects and groups in China. Right. For those of you who don't know us, Give to Asia is a public charity in the United States, and Give to Asia Foundation is a Section 88 foundation in China, Hong Kong. Our focus is to work with private philanthropy to build trusted partnerships and create funding opportunities between private donors and charities in China. Give to Asia has a unique nationwide registration and with broad thematic funding capabilities. We also have a well-staffed office in Beijing that can work directly with grantees and your China-based constituents to help make the process go as smoothly as possible. For the purposes of this presentation, the audiences that will benefit from this webinar include corporations and their corporate foundations, family donors and their professional advisors, private professional and family foundations. We also do quite a bit of work with charities around the world seeking to fund their local partners in China. Thanks to our global partnerships, we are also able to support charitable giving to China, not only from the US, but also Canada, Europe, Asia, Australia, and New Zealand. This webinar is being recorded, and we will be sharing the recording with all registered attendees. During this webinar, please use the chat function to ask questions, and we will spend the next 15 to 20 minutes with the presentation, and the final 10 minutes will be used for Q&A. Now I'd like to introduce our main speakers for the webinar. Mr. Li Xing is our China CEO and leads day-to-day operations in China for our grant making. He will be speaking today about our grant making process and updates for how to carry out grants in 2025. Ms. Carol Yang is our China Chief Representative and is the person primarily responsible for Give to Asia's activities and compliance in China. She will be talking about the current environment for grant making into China, and we'll discuss some best practices. Okay, now I'd like to hand the mic over to Li Xing.
Thank you, Birger. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Giving to Chinese Charities in 2025 webinar. My name is Li Xing, CEO of Give to Asia Beijing Representative Office. I am responsible for the grant making management for Give to Asia portfolio. In the next around 10 minutes, I'll be taking you through the process of making grants into China. As you can see, in essence, we need to go through 4 major steps when making grants into China. They are preparation, AAP approval, US approval, and then finally monitoring and reporting. For preparation stage, we can actually help the donor identify suitable grantees and projects if needed. Once grantee and project scope are confirmed, we then ask donor to sign a commitment form to us so that we are entitled to put this grant into a document called Annual Activity Plan, which will be submitted to a Chinese government department. In our case, Chinese People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries. They will review and approve our grants on behalf of Chinese government. Then we enter the second step, which is called Annual Activity Plan. Our professional supervising unit, Chinese People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries, will review and approve the grants. After its review and approval, Beijing Public Security Bureau will also review and approve grants. Here, I would like to point out that specifically that this AAP approval process will normally take 3 to 4 months, unfortunately. Such timing for grant approval has been maintained stable at 3 to 4 months for a couple of years. Once we get approval from both PSU and PSB, we then go to the next phase, which is US approval. We need to work out the project scope and budget with the help of donor and then grantee, complete due diligence on grantee organization, its senior management team, and then board directors. After this, we will ask our board directors to approve the grant. Once our board approves the grant, Gift Asia Beijing office will then sign the grant agreement with the grantee, and then the fund can be transferred from our US account to our Beijing office account. And then our Beijing office will need to exchange the USD into Chinese currency, RMB. And then the amount of RMB will be transferred to the grantee's account. Please note that the public security pays great attention to this fund flow, which is one of their key responsibilities. It is also worth mentioning that after the signing of grant agreement between the grantee and the Gift Asia Beijing Red Office, Gift Asia Beijing Red Office becomes the owner of the pledge of the project inside China. This means that the Gift Asia Beijing Red Office holds accountable for the implementation of the grant. And if the grant goes well, the PSU and especially PSB will put the legal responsibility on Gift Asia Beijing Red Office. After the fund is transferred to the grantee start the implementation of the grant, and then the Gift Asia Beijing office start the work of monitoring the implementation and reports the progress of the grant to the donor according to the agreement. So we enter the final stage, which is the monitoring and report. Once the grant is completed, we need to get a final report from the grantee. If we accept the final report after review, we will then give the final report to our donor for their review. We will also need to submit this report to our regulator, Public Security Bureau, for their review, according to the Chinese Overseas NGO law requirement. Next, I will talk about some updates related to our China donor sky. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. The first one will be related to the naming of the project. Our Public Security Bureau recently informed us that no donor, grantee, and third-party name can be put into the project name in the submission. But luckily, they still allow us to mention donor's name when donor is doing China publicity. For publicity specifically, we can provide guidance at later stages if we enter deeper discussion with the donor. Secondly, I would like to mention our grant submission windows. Typically, we have 3 window opportunities, and they are December 16, 2024, April 15, 2025, and then August 1st, 2025. Normally, an overseas NGO would only have 1 window, which is at the end of December each year. But Gift Asia managed to get 3, which enable us to add new grants into the pipeline during the year. So I think above is my intro regarding the process that how Gift Asia can help donors to make their grants into China. I'm sure that you may still have some questions surrounding such process and steps. I'm happy to take questions at the Q&A section. Now I would like to give back the floor to Berger. Over to you, Berger.
Thank you, Li Jing. Thanks for going over all of that. And as Li Jing just mentioned, we'll have the Q&A period at the end of the presentations here so people can ask questions in more detail about our grant-making process into China and how approvals are working with China. Now I'd like to pass the mic over to Carol Yang, who's our China Chief Representative, to talk a little bit more about best practices and the current grant-making environment into China. Carol?
Thank you. I'm going to talk about the two sides of the dynamics. One side, I can say it's called the openness. So the other side, it's the caution. In recent years, the Chinese government has introduced a series of open policy to promote economic growth, attract foreign investment, and enhance the international competitiveness. Some key points. Foreign investment law implemented in 2020, free trade zone establishment in Seoul Provincial, Belt and Road Initiative, open up a service sector such as financing, education, and healthcare, straighten up the intellectual property protection, and open up more market access. This policy reflects China's determination to promote economic openness, further and deepen reform in the context of the globalization. So this is one part. On the other part, I call it a caution. Various levels of the government, management agencies, and functional departments exercise caution when accepting foreign donation for several reasons. So I can name these reasons. First reason is national security. Foreign donation may pose risk to national security, especially when the source of the donation is unclear or relate to sensitive issue, potentially threaten the national interest. Two, funding transparency. The source of use of funds from foreign donation may not be sufficiently transparent. Government must ensure the legality and the compliance for this fund to prevent the corruption and misuse. Three, policy compliance. Accepting foreign donation must be complied with relevant national laws and regulation, ensuring that the donation activity do not violate the domestic policy and rules. Four, public opinion impact. Foreign donation may attract the public attention and discussion. Government must handle this matter cautiously to avoid unnecessary social pressure. Fifth, culture and value differences. Foreign donation may bring external culture and value influence. Government must assess whether this influence aligns with the national culture and values. Six, purpose of donations. Some of the foreign donations may have a specific purpose or condition. Government must be carefully evaluate whether this condition align with the national long-term interest. In summary, the cautious approach taken by various levels of the government when accepting foreign donations aim to safeguard the national security, ensure funding transparency and the compliance, protect the national interest, and address the potential social pressures. the tension between more openness and more caution does exist. However, they can be compromise each other through a practical strategy to adjust these challenges. Here are some of the strategies we at Give to Asia implemented. One, to establish a transparency mechanism. Two, risk assessment and management. Three, open exchange with our PSU and PSB to gain their trust. Four, local knowledge of different government offices and functional departments. Fifth, we are working closely with our local grantees to understand their challenges and help them learn how to communicate with local governments. Six, to develop emergency plans for potential issues. So this is some of the strategy we in Give to Asia implementing.
Thank you, Carol.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. It's great to hear that grant making into China continues to be open and to better understand the dynamics of that process from you. And before we get into the Q&A, I'd like to highlight, in addition to our DAF grant making, donor advised fund grant making is our sort of a primary mode for support into China. However, we also are curating a number of projects and partnering with organizations that we know well in China to present giving opportunities. And we want to just highlight that here. And if you're interested in learning more, please go ahead and scan the QR code in the top right corner of the slide that's currently showing. Yeah, and so now we will move on to the question and answer period. And we have a few questions that have come in over the course of the presentation here. And I also encourage people to continue asking questions through the chat, and we will try to get through all of the questions that come in. The first question that we have is related, I think, specifically for Carol. You mentioned that there are areas where more caution is required. Can you share if there are specific themes or issues for funding that you can fund in China that require less or more caution?
I would tend to point out the area like environmental and education, but the more I think it's not accurate. So that's why I name out those issues may cause the difficulty to get grant approval. So, but then when these issues, we see a little more in the education side, especially in the sensitive subject matter of the university. So the other is environmental side, but it's not including the disaster relief. It's more in the research, data collector, the kind of work in the grant. So this is, we can see these areas cause more cautions. We need to have a back and forth dealing with our compliance agents.
Thank you, Carol. The next question, I think I can answer. The question is, does Give to Asia have a minimum grant amount? The Give to Asia does make grants into China of a sort of a wide variety of sort of different grant sizes. Our typical minimum grant amount is $10,000 US. And we think that that's a reasonable minimum to set based on the work that's required on a per grant basis to go through the approval process with the Chinese government that's been outlined here in the presentation. The next question is, can you please provide insight into the level of detail that is needed at the initial PSU approval versus the broader budget and scoping that's done later during the U.S. approval process? Maybe Li Xing, you could start with that, and I can fill in any blanks that might be left over on the U.S. compliance side.
Okay. When we are getting the commitment firm, we need to have the information like the donor's name and the amount of the donation to China. And then the other one item, which is very important, is the location. And then the next one would be the description of the scope of the grant activity. It doesn't have, in terms of the scope, it doesn't have to be very detailed, but it can let people understand what kind of grant activity is going to be designed and to be implemented in China. For example, if it is education grant, related grant, then we need to know at least that where it will be going to be implemented, and then whether it is in the primary school or middle school, high school, or university. And then if it is for example, in the university, then we need to know the university's name. Because at the review stage of the PSU, they want actually to have the kind of a consent letter from the university or from the local education bureau who's governing the like local primary school, middle school, or high school. So that's actually the main four parts related to the commitment firm, which is for the PSU approval. Then at the later stage, when we got the approval, then we certainly need to have a very detailed description of the scope of the activity, and then we also need to have a very detailed budget as well. But I think this part is also would have to be compliant with the US law. I will let Birgit to answer it.
Sure. And on the US compliance side, we follow expenditure responsibility guidelines for the level of detail that we pulled together for our approval process and for scoping a full project description and budget with defined outputs that are then tied to a grant agreement that Give to Asia signs with the grantee. That's all part of the expenditure responsibility process. So after the PSU and PSB approval in China, there is a US approval process that is relatively quick compared to the China process, but that does involve a more detailed and fully blown out project description and budget. So hopefully that response from Li Xing and from myself help clarify the difference between the two steps. The next question, I think I can also answer, which is whether we are able to receive donations from donors in the UK. And the question references that we mentioned the EU in the slide. We have a partnership with the King Baldwin Foundation, Myriad Europe, and they are part of the Transnational Giving Europe Network, which does include UK. So I hope that answers that question. The funding ultimately, whether it's received in the EU or the UK or North America, does need to flow through Give to Asia and be granted by Give to Asia, moving through our foreign currency bank account and RMB bank account in China before reaching the grantee. The next question, I believe, is for Li Sheng. The question is, does Give to Asia advise on funding opportunities? And if so, how much of Give to Asia's grant making is donor identified? And how much of Give to Asia's grant making is Give to Asia identified?
Okay, I think as actually I point out in my presentation earlier, we actually advise the donors funding opportunities. For example, today we receive a bank, a big bank globally, to ask us whether whether we can help them to identify a suitable partner or NGO inside China to meet their requirements and expectations for their grant making contribution to a disadvantaged rural education opportunity. And so we can actually advise on funding opportunity. In terms of how much, I think it's a very interesting topic. In terms of the number of the grantees that we can advise to the donors, I think it's half and half. So I think half of the grantees would be actually advised or recommended by Give to Asia. And half will be there because there are some of our donors, they have some China staff. And sometimes they can ask the China staff to search for the NGOs or charities in China. And then when they have those name of the charities in China, they can ask us whether they are suitable. So we still have some sort of advising function here. But in terms of the amount, I must say that the advised amount is less than the donor selected amount, donor selected grantee situation, which means that at the moment I think donor self-selected grantees, the amount that they receive is bigger than the amount of the contribution that Give to Asia advise or recommend.
Right.
That's my answer, Berger.
Thank you, Li Sheng. The next question is just a request for a bit more information on the new project naming rules that were mentioned earlier in the presentation and whether there's any documentation or written guidance that we've received on this that could be communicated. Li Sheng?
The naming rules.
The new naming rules regarding donor name in the project name that you mentioned in the changes.
Unfortunately, that we don't have the written kind of document from both our PSU and PSB, but we did have some sort of exchange with them, either through the meetings in the office or through the WeChat and then phone call. But if we are asking that kind of a written document, which I think other donors have already asked us as well, that we are not able to provide. But if you think during the implementation stage, you wanted to know exactly whether our PSU or PSB truly have that kind of policy, we welcome you, and we will accompany you to have kind of meeting with PSU and PSB to rectify whether this the new policy from those departments. That's one thing. The second thing is that we are actually talking to PSU and PSB both to see whether they can actually make some changes to these naming rules because, for example, if it is for the individual donors, from our point of view, it seems that it doesn't make sense that you take the individual names out of the grant because that is something that the individual donor wants to actually show in China to incentivize himself or herself or his family or her family. So for that part, I think maybe in the future we can see that they probably can make some change, but at the moment they still need to fully comply with these new rules. Very good.
Thank you, Li-Xing. The next question I'm going to just pose to both Carol and Li-Xing and just see what response they have. Over the past years, there's been some overseas NGO service centers opening up in parts of China to assist with the grant making and sort of regulations around grant making into China. The question is, how is this development affecting Give to Asia's work, if it's having any impact at all?
I can speaking about this point. The ONGO try to and want to register in China recently become more difficult. So this is a number of the things. The compliance requirement is very high. And then so the other things, the economic cost is also it's for consideration. Unlike a Give to Asia, we have the higher volume of the giving, so then we can deal with the economic cost. So for some of the smaller and medium ONGO try to have a registered office in China. So they have to get to the compliance issue. They have a number of the personnel required to working in the rep office. And that's doesn't a very good choice for them. So we don't see too many ONGO successfully register in China in the recent years.
Okay. Thank you, Carol, and I hope that answers the question that was asked. We have one more question that I see, but of course we're welcome to others as well. The question is, can grant-making organizations use services without opening a DAF? And if so, what fees are incurred, if any? And I can answer that question. We do make grants into China using the same process, in terms of the approval process into China. On the US side, the different services that we have to enable grant making into China include donor advised funds. We also enter into restricted grant making agreements with private foundations to support organizations in China. And we also have pooled funds such as Friends Funds and some special interest funds that were referenced on the final slide before we got into the Q&A. So we do have flexibility in terms of how we work with donors in order to support grant making into China. It's not just donor advised funds, and we're happy to have a conversation with you about the structure you may need for your organization as a grant maker. I'm not seeing any further questions. So unless something pops in the next second or two, I think we've come to the end of the webinar. I'd like to thank everyone for attending and for your interest in this topic, and for your interest in grant making into China. Apologies again for the late start, and we appreciate your patience. I also would like to thank once again our two speakers, Mr. Li Xing, our China CEO, and Ms. Carol Yang, our China Chief Representative. Once again, we will be sharing a recording of this webinar with all registered attendees. Of course, feel free to share that recording with others in your network who you think would be interested in the content. And we look forward to hearing from each of you individually about your future plans and how we might be able to help. We're always open to having a discussion, to brainstorm or problem solve with you as you're thinking about your next steps. Again, thank you very much. I want to note also that we will be, there was a question about fee structure, and we are working on our 2025 China Donors Guide, which is going to be ready in early November. So we will be sending a recording of this webinar very soon, but we'll also follow up in the next week or two with everyone who's attended and registered with our updated China Donors Guide, which will include our 2025 fee schedule, which is unchanged from 2024. Thank you very much. And with that, have a great day, everyone.